She was carrying his child, and he looked at her like a stranger. He once said her smile was the only thing he needed in this world. But the moment her body began to change, he started walking 3 steps ahead of her in public. What she found hidden in his study didn't just break her heart, it exposed a secret so devastating that when he finally learned the truth, he fell to his knees and begged for a forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. Stay with me till the end, because what happens in this story will make you question how easily love can turn into shame, and how far one woman had to go to remember her own worth. Intro, 020 to 050. Her name was Evelyn. 26 years old, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who noticed everyone's needs before her own. His name was James. 31, sharp-suited, a man who had built an empire out of control over his business, his image, and without even realizing it, control over the people who loved him. They had been married for almost 2 years. To everyone watching from the outside, they were the perfect couple. But love, as Evelyn was about to learn, isn't tested in the easy seasons. It's tested in the moments when a body changes, when a face grows tired, when the fairy tale starts asking for something real. This is where their story begins. For nearly 2 years, Evelyn believed she had married the one man in the world who would always stand between her and the storm. James had once adored her the way people adore something rare. He used to reach across restaurant tables just to hold her hand for no reason at all. He used to tell her, in that low voice he saved only for her, that her smile was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, more beautiful than any deal he'd ever closed, any building he'd ever put his name on. Evelyn had believed him. Why wouldn't she? He had chosen her out of every woman who wanted to be chosen. He had promised her forever in front of 300 guests, his voice steady, his eyes wet. But forever, it turned out, had conditions James had never spoken out loud. Everything began to shift the day Evelyn found out she was pregnant. She remembered that morning perfectly, the 2 pink lines on the test, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it into the sink. She had run to find James in his home office, tears already spilling down her cheeks, and when she told him, he had lifted her off her feet and spun her around the room, laughing in a way she hadn't heard in months. "We're going to be parents," he had whispered against her hair. "You're going to be an incredible mother." For a few weeks, it felt like nothing could touch them. But pregnancy does not ask permission before it changes a woman. It doesn't negotiate. It simply arrives, and it rearranges everything, the body, the sleep, the appetite, the face in the mirror. Evelyn's changes came quickly. Within the first trimester, exhaustion sat on her chest like a stone she couldn't push off. Morning sickness didn't wait politely for mornings, it came at any hour it pleased, leaving her pale and shaking over the bathroom sink. Her clothes, the same ones that used to fit her like they were sewn for her body alone, began to strain at the seams. Her face, once sharp and defined, softened into something rounder, fuller, tired. At first, James seemed to take it in stride. He'd rub her back when she was sick. He'd order her favorite soup when she couldn't stomach anything else. He told her, more than once, that this was simply what love looked like now, patience, softness, waiting it out together. But somewhere around the 4th month, something in him began to change too. Quietly. Slowly. The way a bruise spreads before you ever remember getting hit. He started coming home later. He started answering her questions in single words. He started looking at his phone instead of at her. Evelyn told herself it was work. James ran 3 companies, of course he was tired. Of course his mind was elsewhere. She made excuses for him the way women who love deeply often do, quietly, generously, at her own expense. Then came the evening that would replay in her mind for months afterward. She had been standing in front of the bedroom mirror, trying to force the zipper of her favorite dress closed over a belly that no longer allowed it. She twisted, sucked in a breath she didn't have to spare, and finally gave up, letting her arms drop to her sides in defeat. "Do you think I still look beautiful?" she asked, glancing at James's reflection behind her. Her voice was quiet. Almost apologetic, as if she already suspected she was asking too much. James didn't look up from his phone right away. When he finally did, his eyes moved over her, not the way they used to, hungry and warm, but the way someone studies a problem they don't know how to solve. "You don't look like yourself anymore," he said. The words landed like a slap she hadn't seen coming. Evelyn's smile, the one she'd been holding onto out of habit, disappeared completely. "What do you mean?" she asked, though some part of her already understood. James sighed, that particular sigh of his, the one that always meant he thought he was the one being inconvenienced. "You've changed so much." Evelyn looked down at her stomach, at the small curve that held the child they had made together, the child he had spun her around the room for. "Our baby is growing," she said softly, as if reminding him, as if he could have forgotten. "I know," James replied, and his voice was cold in a way she had never heard directed at her before. "But I didn't expect you to let yourself go like this." Let yourself go. 3 words. That was all it took to break something inside her that had taken years to build, her confidence, her sense of safety, the quiet certainty that no matter how she looked, she was still the woman he had chosen. She turned away from him quickly, before he could see the tears gathering, blinking hard at the wall as if that could hold them back. She didn't say anything else that night. Neither did he. He went back to his phone. She went back to the mirror, staring at a body she no longer recognized as her own, not because it had betrayed her, but because the man who was supposed to love every version of it had just told her it wasn't enough. From that night forward, something between them shifted permanently, like a door quietly closing that neither of them tried to reopen. James began avoiding being seen with her. At dinners with his business partners, he would walk several steps ahead, leaving her to catch up on her own, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly as if to protect it from the distance he kept creating. At social events, when old friends asked where Evelyn was, why she hadn't come, James would simply say she wasn't feeling well. It became his go-to excuse, easy, believable, and cruel in a way he never seemed to notice. Evelyn noticed. Evelyn noticed everything. She noticed how he stopped reaching for her hand in the car. She noticed how he began sleeping later in his office instead of coming to bed. She noticed how, when she tried to talk about the baby, about names, about the nursery, about the future, his answers grew shorter and shorter until they were barely answers at all. She told herself it was hormones making her sensitive. She told herself it was just a phase, that men sometimes struggled to understand pregnancy, that things would return to normal once the baby arrived. She repeated these reassurances to herself the way you repeat a prayer you're not sure you still believe in, just to get through the night. But one evening, walking past James's study with a cup of tea in her hands, Evelyn heard his voice through the half-open door. He was on the phone with his mother. She should have kept walking. Some instinct told her to keep walking. Instead, she stopped. "I don't know what happened to her," James was saying, his voice low but audible. "She used to take care of herself." Evelyn's grip on the teacup tightened. His mother's voice came through the speaker, tinny and dismissive. "She'll return to normal after the baby." Return to normal. As if she were a machine that had temporarily malfunctioned. As if the body growing his child inside her was an inconvenience to be tolerated until it corrected itself. Evelyn stood frozen behind the door, the tea slowly going cold in her hands, silent tears sliding down her face before she even realized she was crying. The woman who was carrying his child, who had given up so much of her own comfort, her own body, her own sense of self to bring his daughter into the world, felt, in that moment, like a stranger standing in the hallway of her own marriage. She didn't confront him that night. She wasn't ready. Instead, she carried the wound quietly, the way she had learned to carry so many things since the pregnancy began, and told herself that surely this couldn't get worse. She was wrong. Because a few weeks later, on an ordinary afternoon while looking for a document in James's study, Evelyn found something that would change everything she thought she understood about her marriage. Tucked behind a stack of business files, half hidden as if someone had wanted it forgotten, was a plain white envelope. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. Her hands began to tremble before she even opened it. Some part of her, some quiet, instinctive part, already knew this envelope held something important. Something he hadn't wanted her to see. She opened it slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself might hurt her. Inside was a medical report. Her medical report. Her eyes scanned the page, and her breath caught in her throat. The report detailed a serious pregnancy complication, one that required immediate treatment and careful, consistent monitoring. Her blood pressure. Her stress markers. Words she didn't fully understand but recognized enough to feel the fear settle into her bones. But it was the date at the top of the page that made her stomach drop. This report was from months ago. James had known. He had known for months, and he had said nothing. At the bottom of the page, beneath the clinical language, was a handwritten note in their doctor's careful script. Her stress levels are dangerously high. She needs emotional support from her husband. Evelyn couldn't breathe. All those nights she had cried alone in the bathroom, telling herself it was just hormones. All those evenings she had made excuses for his coldness, for his distance, for the way he flinched at the sight of her changing body. And the entire time, he had known that she was struggling, known that her health and her heart both needed him, and instead of holding her closer, he had pushed her further away and made her feel ashamed of the very body trying to protect their child. The paper shook in her hands. She sat down slowly at the edge of his desk chair, staring at the words until they blurred, until she couldn't tell anymore if it was tears or disbelief clouding her vision. She thought of every moment he had looked at her with that flicker of disappointment. Every time he'd said you don't look like yourself. Every dinner he'd walked ahead of her at. Every excuse he'd made to his friends, to his mother, to himself. He had known she was sick. And he had let her believe, for months, that the problem was her. Evelyn folded the report carefully, her movement strangely calm now, as though something inside her had gone very still. She walked out of the study and into the dining room, and there she sat, the envelope placed neatly in front of her on the table, and she waited. She didn't have to wait long. She heard the front door open. She heard his footsteps, familiar after 2 years of marriage, slow suddenly as he crossed into the dining room and saw her sitting there in the low evening light, the envelope resting between her folded hands like evidence at a trial only he was about to stand for. He stopped in the doorway. Evelyn. She didn't look up right away. When she finally did, her eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "You knew," she said quietly. James's face went pale in an instant, all the color draining from it the way it does when someone realizes there is no explanation good enough for what's coming. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When?" Evelyn's voice cracked on the single word, but she held his gaze. "When were you going to tell me, James?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time since she had known him, this man who always had an answer, a strategy, a way to talk his way through any negotiation, James had absolutely nothing to say. And in that silence, in that unbearable, stretching silence, Evelyn finally understood the shape of what her marriage had become. She just didn't yet know how far the truth would go, or what it would cost both of them before this story was over. The silence in the dining room stretched so long that Evelyn could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, each second landing like a small hammer against her chest. James stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase still hanging from his hand, forgotten. His eyes moved from Evelyn's face to the envelope on the table and back again, and for the first time in their marriage, Evelyn watched the confident, controlled man she married completely lose his footing. "Say something," she said, her voice trembling now, the calm she had carried into this moment finally beginning to crack. "Tell me why you hid this from me." James set the briefcase down slowly, as if buying himself a few extra seconds before he had to face what was coming. He pulled out the chair across from her but didn't sit. He just gripped the back of it, his knuckles turning white. I was scared, he finally said. Scared of what? Evelyn's voice rose, sharper now. Scared of taking care of your wife? Scared of telling me the truth about my own health? James dropped into the chair, running both hands through his hair, and when he looked up at her again, his eyes were wet in a way she hadn't seen since the day he proposed to her. My father used to say that a man's success is measured by what his family looks like, he said quietly. Not what they feel. Not what they need. What they look like. Growing up, I watched him choose my mother's appearance over her happiness 100 times, and I told myself I'd never be like him. He let out a bitter laugh, the kind that has no humor in it at all. And then the moment things got hard, the moment you needed me the most, I became exactly him. Evelyn's hands trembled around the edge of the table. So instead of holding me through this, you were worried about how I looked at dinner parties? James flinched like she had struck him. When I saw the report, when I saw how serious it was, I panicked. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix you. And I didn't know how to say any of that out loud, so I just disappeared. I told myself if I stayed distant, it would hurt less if something happened. Something happened, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. It already did. You made me feel like the ugliest, most unworthy version of myself while I was fighting to keep our daughter safe. Do you understand that, James? While my body was working overtime to protect her, you were making me feel ashamed of it. James's shoulders shook. For the first time, Evelyn watched her husband cry, not the composed, controlled emotion he allowed himself at business dinners when a deal fell through, but real, uncontained grief. I know, he whispered. I know, and there's no excuse good enough. You're right, Evelyn said, standing up. There isn't. She walked past him toward the stairs, and though every step ached with exhaustion, she didn't stop. Behind her, she heard James call her name once, softly, but she didn't turn around. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep in their bedroom. She packed a small bag with trembling hands, a few changes of clothes, her prenatal vitamins, the ultrasound photo she kept in her nightstand drawer, and she left before sunrise, driving to her sister Claire's house on the other side of the city. Claire opened the door still in her pajamas, took one look at Evelyn's swollen eyes and the small bag in her hand, and pulled her inside without asking a single question. She simply held her while Evelyn finally let herself sob, months of swallowed hurt pouring out all at once. I don't know what to do, Evelyn whispered into her sister's shoulder. I don't know if I even want to fix this. You don't have to know right now, Claire said gently. Right now, you just need to breathe. You and the baby. That's the only job you have. For the first time in months, Evelyn let herself simply rest. Claire made her tea, tucked blankets around her on the couch, and sat with her in silence, the kind of silence that didn't ask anything of her. Back at the mansion, James stood alone in rooms that suddenly felt enormous and hollow. He wandered from room to room that first night, unable to sleep, unable to sit still. He passed the nursery, the one Evelyn had spent weeks preparing without much help from him. Soft yellow walls. A white crib assembled with painstaking care. Tiny clothes folded into drawers, organized by size, waiting for a baby who wasn't even born yet. He hadn't noticed any of it before. He hadn't let himself notice. Now, standing in the doorway of that nursery, James felt something inside his chest cave in. He saw, really saw for the first time, how much love Evelyn had poured into a home he barely lived in emotionally. While he had been busy being ashamed of her body, she had been building an entire world for their daughter with hands he'd stopped holding. He sat down on the small rocking chair in the corner of the room, a chair Evelyn had picked out specifically for late-night feedings, and put his face in his hands. It was there, hours later, that he found the notebook. It had slipped partway beneath the chair cushion, a simple leather journal with Evelyn's handwriting spilling across page after page. James almost didn't open it. Some instinct told him this was hers, private, not meant for him. But another part of him, the part that was desperate to understand what he had done, needed to know. He opened to the first page. "To my little one," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to write down how I feel while you're still growing inside me, before the world gets loud and complicated." James's hands shook as he turned the pages. Entry after entry, Evelyn had written to their unborn daughter, hopes for her future, memories of feeling her first kick, fears about becoming a mother, gratitude for the life growing inside her despite everything else falling apart around her. Then he reached an entry from just a few weeks earlier, and the words stopped his heart cold. "Your father may not understand me right now," Evelyn had written, "but I hope one day he understands how much we love him. I hope, when you're older, you know that even in the hardest moments, I never stopped believing he could become the man I fell in love with. I just don't know if he believes it about himself." James read the passage 3 times, tears blurring the ink until he had to blink hard to keep reading. Even in her pain, even while he was pushing her away, Evelyn had been defending him, not to his face, not where it could soften his behavior, but privately, in the pages meant only for their daughter. She had held on to hope for him even when he had given her every reason to let it go. He closed the notebook gently, as if it were something sacred, and sat in the dark nursery for a long time, finally understanding the full weight of what he stood to lose. Not just a wife. Not just a marriage that looked good from the outside. A woman who had loved him through his worst moments and asked for nothing except the same in return. Over the following days, James threw himself into something he hadn't done in years: genuine reflection. He cancelled meetings. He turned his phone off during hours he used to spend buried in it. He sat with the discomfort of his own actions instead of distracting himself from them, the way he always had before. He called his father, for the first time in months, not for advice but to finally say the thing he'd never said. "I understand now why Mom always seemed so tired," James told him over the phone, his voice steady but pointed. "It wasn't because she let herself go. It was because no one ever let her feel like enough." His father was quiet on the other end for a long moment. "Is this about Evelyn?" "It's about all of us," James said. "I almost lost the only thing that ever actually mattered because I was so afraid of looking imperfect to people whose opinions shouldn't matter at all." He didn't wait for his father's response. He hung up, and for the first time, he felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had carried since childhood without ever realizing its weight. He also went to see Evelyn's doctor, not to hide behind another report this time, but to actually understand what she needed. He learned about the specific risks tied to her condition, about the kind of support that could genuinely help lower her stress levels, about how serious it truly was that she hadn't had consistent emotional support through something so physically demanding. Every piece of information made him feel sicker with guilt, and more determined to change. He didn't reach out to Evelyn immediately. He knew, somehow, that showing up with apologies too soon, before he understood what he was even apologizing for, would only prove her right, that he was a man who looked for quick fixes instead of real change. Instead, he waited. He worked. He learned. He sat with his own shame instead of running from it, the way he had run from Evelyn's changing body months before. Meanwhile, at Claire's house, Evelyn was doing her own quiet healing. She followed her doctor's instructions carefully now, without the added weight of hiding her fear from a husband who made her feel judged for needing help. Claire took her to every appointment. Her blood pressure, which had been dangerously high for weeks, began to slowly stabilize with rest, with reduced stress, with the simple relief of not having to perform strength for someone who couldn't see her pain. She also began writing again, not just to her daughter, but for herself. She wrote about the woman she used to be before marriage had slowly worn down her confidence. She wrote about the years she had spent trying to be exactly what James needed, forgetting to ask whether he was becoming what she needed. 2.1 evening, sitting on Claire's back porch with a cup of tea and her hand resting on her belly, Evelyn felt her daughter kick, strong and sure, and she smiled for what felt like the first time in months. "You're going to be so loved," she whispered to her belly. "No matter what happens between me and your father, you are going to know, every single day, that you are enough exactly as you are." It was a promise she intended to keep, one way or another. 3 weeks after Evelyn left, James finally felt ready. Not ready with excuses. Not ready with gifts meant to smooth things over. Ready with the truth, and with actions to back it up. He drove to Claire's house on a quiet Saturday morning, his hands sweating against the steering wheel in a way they never did before even his biggest business negotiations. He knew this conversation mattered more than any deal he had ever closed. He knocked on the door, and when Claire opened it, her expression was guarded, protective. "She doesn't have to see you," Claire said immediately. "You don't get an automatic invitation back into her life just because you feel bad now." "I know," James said quietly. "I'm not here expecting anything. I just need her to know some things, even if she decides she never wants to see me again after today." Something in his voice, steadier, humbler than Claire had ever heard from him, made her step aside. Evelyn was sitting on the couch when he walked in, her hand instinctively resting over her belly. She didn't stand. She simply looked at him, waiting. James didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring expensive gifts, the way he might have months earlier when he still believed problems could be solved with money and grand gestures. He simply stood there, several feet away, giving her the space she clearly still needed. "I don't deserve for you to come back," he said quietly. "I need you to know I understand that." Evelyn said nothing, watching him carefully. "I hurt you because I was afraid of what people would think of me," James continued, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I spent my whole life believing that looking successful mattered more than actually being someone worth loving. And when your body changed because you were doing the most incredible thing a person can do, growing our daughter, keeping her safe even when it was making you sick, I made you feel like it was something to be ashamed of instead of something to be proud of." He swallowed hard. "But now I know the only opinion that ever should have mattered was yours. And I let you believe, for months, that you weren't enough, when the truth is I was never enough for you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "What do you want, James?" she finally asked, her voice quiet but steady. He met her eyes directly. "I want the chance to become the husband you deserved from the very beginning," he said. "Not because I'm scared of losing you. Because I finally understand what I almost threw away." Evelyn looked down at her belly, at the daughter who was growing bigger every day, who deserved a chance at a family that could heal, if healing was even possible. "You can't erase what happened," she said softly. "I know," James answered immediately. "I'm not asking you to erase it. I'm asking for the chance to prove, through everything I do from now on, that I've actually changed, not just in words, but in how I treat you every single day." The room fell silent except for the sound of the clock on Claire's wall, ticking steadily, marking a moment that neither of them would ever forget. Evelyn didn't answer him that day. She wasn't ready to hand her heart back so easily, not after everything it had survived. But something had shifted between them, something neither of them could quite name yet, except to say that for the first time in months, James had finally shown up as the man Evelyn had always hoped he could become. Whether that would be enough would take time to discover. But their story, painful as it had been, was far from over. Trust is a strange thing. It doesn't return all at once, no matter how sincere the apology or how deep the regret. It comes back in small pieces, quietly, the way light returns to a room after a long night, a little at a time, until one day you realize you can see clearly again. Evelyn didn't move back home after that conversation on Claire's couch. Not right away. She told James she needed time, and to his credit, he didn't argue. He didn't pressure her. He simply said, "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, doing the work, whether you come back or not." And he meant it. Over the following weeks, James did something he had never done before in his life. He showed up consistently, without expecting anything in return. He started attending every single prenatal appointment, sitting quietly beside Evelyn in waiting rooms filled with other expecting parents, listening carefully to every word the doctor said instead of checking his phone. He asked questions. He took notes. He learned the name of every vitamin she needed to take, every warning sign to watch for, every small thing that might help lower her stress, but he didn't do it to earn points. He did it because he had finally understood something simple and true: love isn't about how a person looks while they carry your child. It's about showing up for them inside the mess, the exhaustion, the fear, and the uncertainty, especially then, when it's hardest. Slowly, carefully, Evelyn allowed him back into small pieces of her life. First, phone calls, brief and businesslike, about the baby's needs. Then dinners, just the two of them, where James listened more than he spoke, asking about her fears, her hopes, the parts of herself she had lost touch with during the hardest months. One evening, over a simple dinner Evelyn had agreed to only because James had cooked it himself, badly, but with obvious effort, she finally asked him the question that had been sitting in her chest for weeks. "Do you understand why this hurts so much?" she asked. It wasn't just the words. It was feeling like the person who was supposed to make me feel safe made me feel like I had to hide. James set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I do understand now," he said. "I used to think love meant admiring someone. I thought if I stopped feeling that spark of attraction the way I used to, something was wrong with us. I never understood that real love isn't about how someone makes you feel when everything's easy. It's choosing to stay close, to keep showing affection, especially when things get hard and uncomfortable and unfamiliar." He reached for her hand across the table, slowly, giving her room to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. "You were never less beautiful to me, Evelyn," he said quietly. "I was just too broken to see beauty in anything that didn't look like control. You taught me, without even trying, that real strength doesn't always look neat and put together. Sometimes it looks like someone getting sick every morning and still getting up to build a nursery with her own hands. Sometimes it looks like writing letters to a baby who isn't even born yet, promising her she'll always be loved, even when the person who should be loving you both isn't showing up." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of pain. "I read your notebook," James admitted softly. "I know I shouldn't have. But it changed everything for me. You kept believing in me even when I gave you every reason to stop. I don't know if I've ever deserved that kind of faith from anyone." "Maybe you didn't deserve it yet," Evelyn said honestly. "But I think some part of me always believed you could become someone who did." 2 months later, Evelyn moved back home. It wasn't a dramatic reunion with fireworks and grand declarations. It was quiet, steady, built on the small proof James had been offering her every single day, showing up, listening, choosing her again and again in ways both large and small. The final weeks of her pregnancy were different from anything she had experienced before. James rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings without being asked. He learned to cook the specific meals that settled her stomach. He held her when the exhaustion became too much, not because he wanted her to stop feeling tired, but because he finally understood that comfort doesn't fix pain, it simply means someone is willing to sit inside it with you. When labor finally came, it arrived in the middle of the night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. James didn't panic the way Evelyn feared he might. He stayed calm, focused entirely on her, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, reminding her how strong she was every single time doubt crept into her eyes. Hours later, in a hospital room filled with the quiet hum of machines and the soft light of early morning, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy baby girl. James was there through the entire delivery, refusing to leave her side even for a moment. When the doctor finally placed their daughter into his arms, something in him broke open completely, not in pain this time, but in a kind of overwhelming love he had never allowed himself to feel so fully before. He looked down at his daughter's tiny face, then up at Evelyn, exhausted and glowing in the hospital bed, and he began to cry. "You were never less beautiful," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for one single second of this entire journey." Evelyn smiled at him, tired but genuinely happy in a way she hadn't been in a long time. "I know that now," she said softly. "It just took both of us learning it the hard way." James carried their daughter to her, gently placing her in Evelyn's arms, and pressed a soft kiss to the back of Evelyn's hand. "I'm sorry it took almost losing you to understand it," he whispered. "You didn't lose me," Evelyn said, looking down at their daughter's small, sleeping face. "You almost lost yourself. I think, in a strange way, this whole painful journey helped you find your way back." Their marriage, in the months that followed, wasn't magically perfect. Trust doesn't work that way, and Evelyn was wise enough to know it. There were still moments of doubt, nights when old wounds ached unexpectedly, conversations that required patience and honesty neither of them was used to giving so freely. But James kept showing up. Every single day. He learned to say, "I'm proud of you," instead of staying silent when Evelyn's body slowly changed again after birth, adjusting to motherhood in its own time. He learned to notice the small, quiet moments of exhaustion in new motherhood and step in without being asked, holding their daughter through midnight feeding so Evelyn could finally rest. He learned that love isn't something you feel once and coast on for the rest of your life. It's something you choose again and again, especially in the moments it would be easier not to. Evelyn, for her part, learned something important too, something that would stay with her far beyond this one relationship, this one chapter of her life. She learned that her worth was never something someone else's opinion could take away, no matter how much it had felt that way in her darkest moments. Her body had done something extraordinary. It had protected a life, nurtured it, brought it safely into the world despite fear, despite dangerously high stress levels, despite feeling unseen by the one person who should have seen her most clearly. She had survived not because someone finally decided to love her the right way, but because she had never truly stopped believing in her own strength, even when it felt like no one else did. A woman's worth doesn't disappear when her body changes. It doesn't disappear when she's tired, or scared, or struggling to recognize herself in the mirror. If anything, those moments reveal a strength most people never even know they carry until life demands it of them. Pregnancy hadn't taken Evelyn's beauty away. It had revealed something far more important: her resilience, her patience, her quiet, unshakable capacity to keep loving even when love wasn't being returned the way she deserved. And the man who once looked at her changing body with shame became, slowly and imperfectly, the man who spent the rest of his life making sure she never doubted her worth again, not because he was perfect, but because he chose, every single day, to keep becoming better for her. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that your worth was never meant to be measured by someone else's comfort, or by how easily your struggles could be seen and understood by others, then you already know exactly why stories like this one matter. Real love was never about staying the same. It's about growing through the hard seasons together, choosing each other again on the days it would be easier to walk away. Evelyn's strength wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and completely unshakable, the same kind of strength so many people carry every single day without ever being told how extraordinary it truly is. Wherever you are in your own story right now, whatever season feels heavy or uncertain, remember this: your worth was never up for debate. It was never something anyone else had the power to take from you, even when it felt that way in your hardest moments. If this story moved you, stay with us. There are so many more journeys like Evelyn's waiting to be told, stories of quiet strength, of hearts that break and heal, of people who find their way back to who they were always meant to be. Subscribe, like, and stay close, because the next story might just be the one that speaks directly to whatever you're carrying right now. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.